Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's episode, we're jumping into some lighter beers. This is yet another of the many Tavour beer procured reviews that I'm doing. I am going to have a separate playlist for all of the videos or reviews I've done of beers that I have gotten through Tavour. If you haven't caught that many of my episodes or you haven't caught any of the Tavour beer-based reviews, Tavour is a company based out of Washington State that you can really think of as kind of your inside man to in demand and hard to get or nearly impossible to get beers. They have a curated selection of top tier, top rated beers from all around the country and indeed globally. And many of these are virtually impossible to get your hands on. They're so limited release and such small batch and so popular that they sell out on release date even if you live in the city where they're brewed. Not everything that they have in their lineup is quite as hard to get. Some are reasonably mainstream from more well-known brewers you could probably find in a place like Total Wine or a local well-stocked craft shop, but by and large it's been a really great experience so far. I'm still finishing up beers from my second shipment from Tavour, and this is my next to last review of my second shipment. Today, we're going to be reviewing a Pale Ale and two different Pilsners. We're going to start with the Pale Ale. This is the Bale Breaker Brewing Company's Field 41. It's 5.2% ABV. They are based in Moxie, Washington, and they are right in the heart of the Yakima Valley, which, if you don't know, is really America's hop belt. It is hop central for American hop farm operators. And indeed, this company grows and uses their own hops in their own beers. Several episodes ago, I did a review of one of their IPAs, and it was absolutely incredible. So I'm really looking forward to jumping into their standard Pale Ale. Number two is by Barrier Brewing Company. This is their Barstool Warrior Pilsner. Clocks in at 5% ABV. They are based out of Oceanside, New York. And this is a brew that they brewed together in collaboration with Dream Theater, the band. I guess they're friends with one another and they said, hey, let's brew together. And this is what they came up with. So this ought to be really cool. Dream Theater, awesome band. Never had a beer by Barrier Brewing Company, so I'm looking forward to jumping in and trying them. And finally, we are going to end up with the second Pilsner of the day. This is the Aslan Brewing Company's Washington Gold Pilsner. This is 4.8% ABV. They are out of Bellingham, Washington, which I think is just outside or a suburb of Seattle. So it's not far from where Bale Breaker is located. And this interesting tidbit was the official beer of Seattle Beer Week this year. So I expect if it got to claim that honor that it's probably a pretty stinking good Pilsner. So three lighter beers, been doing a lot of heavier IPAs and darker stouts and porters. Decided to turn the corner, jump into something light. And I love Pale Ales and I love Pilsners, one of my absolute favorite styles. So I'm really looking forward to jumping into today's review. We will be starting off with the Bale Breaker Brewing Company's Field 41. Again, that's the Pale Ale, 5.2% ABV out of Moxie, Washington. All right, so starting off with Bale Breaker's Field 41. This is the Pale Ale of the bunch, 5.2% ABV out of Moxie, Washington, which this brewer is based squarely in the middle of the hop belt there in Yakima Valley, and they grow their own hops that they use in their beers. So I expect if this is a Pale Ale version, anything like the Bottom Cutter IPA that I sampled from them. In fact, that might have been an Imperial. I'll have to double check my records, but I expect this is going to be quite nice. It tastes very fresh indeed. Hops fresh from the source. It doesn't get any better than that. Let's get this poured. Oh, this is looking lovely. Oh, this is a beautiful looking Pale Ale. This is textbook Pale Ale. That beautiful yellow color, deep yellow with just a tinge of amber to it. That is a classic Pale Ale. It's a little bit deeper of a color on average than, say, from a Helles or from a Goza or something like that. That's a little lighter, kind of hay colored yellow. but this looks lovely. Very, very, very effervescent indeed. Let's give it a sniff. The head formed beautifully. Oh, that smells great. You can smell just a perfect balance, the malt bill and the hops in there. It really, really, really smells lovely, an absolutely lovely smelling beer. It's very bright. It smells very bright and floral and refreshing. And in between that floral and that nice malt back, there's some earthy hop undertones. So I don't know exactly what hops they used in the hop bill, but it smells fantastic. Head has settled a little bit here, gotten out of the way, still got nice cling on the sides of the glass. I'm going to jump straight in so we can see what this is about. Oh, that's a nice pale ale. That's a nice pale ale. Okay, this is a classic pale ale. I would say it's not on the lighter end. It's not on the super duper hop forward end. It's somewhere squarely in the middle, but the hop presence comes through very strongly. It's not what I would term an overtly bitter beer, not by a long shot, but it has hop presence. Not just in the aroma, but in the flavor. You can really, really taste the hops. The malt backbone is really nice. It's really clean. It's got a very kind of, not grainy, but more leaning toward the kind of toast, almost like the finish on a goza. It's got like the toast and crumb and kind of biscuity kind of malt characteristics. It's very, very nice, and it pairs so well with these hops. Predominantly, it is an earthy type of hop flavor profile that comes through. Yeah, it's very nice. And just a hint of floral on the front, but then it's nice, deep, rich, earthy hops. It's like a richer version of a Fuggle hop, the classic light English bittering hop. It's very nice. It's got an earthy quality to it. Taste of the earth is the best way I can describe it. If you've had a lot of IPAs or indeed a lot of different beers, I'm sure you can understand what I'm talking about. Really, when I think of hops, I categorize them. There may be more, but there are four main categorizations that come to my mind. There's kind of citrusy, there's floral, there's earthy, and there's kind of pine and resin. That's kind of the four main flavor and indeed aroma profiles that come through in the vast, vast majority of hops. There are some that split somewhere in the middle with some different characteristics and undertones, like you might get some tropical fruit notes. But in general, those are the four main categorizations of hops when we're talking about aroma and flavor. And this is very, very earthy. It's very well done. This is another beer that I would categorize cleanly as a classic hot summer days beer. And it's a hot summer day beer for the hop lover. Pale ales are a little hoppier than some lighter beers, but it's not an India pale ale. It's not overtly hopped, and it's not supposed to be. This is ridiculously well balanced. It's very, very refreshing. The hop presence is known, the malt bill is known, and it's playing in really beautiful harmony. Very well balanced. The hop is a little more forward than the malt, and that's really as it should be for a pale ale. This is a really, really fine example of what a pale ale should be. This is just as good as that IPA I had from Bale Breaker. Completely different styles. Pale ales and India pale ales are completely different styles. They may share some names, but the historical context behind them and what goes into the process of making them are quite different. Not in the actual creation of it, but in volume of ingredients, namely the hops. This is so well done. And the malt, of course. 5.2, it's a good middle of the road. Maybe scooting to the high end of middle for the ABV. It a little bit higher. It could get into IPA territory. But again, the hops and the malts and the balance of the two, those are the main defining characteristics. This is a really, really fine pale ale. I'm really enjoying this. It's very refreshing. It's so nice to jump into some lighter beers. I do so much that's heavy. It's nice to jump into some nice lighter, just clean beer. The body is medium light. The mouthfeel, it's not viscous, but it's got some weight to it. The finish, it's not ridiculously long, but it's longer than your average lighter beer. And this is not a light beer by any stretch, but lighter in color, lighter in ingredient volume. This has got a much longer finish, and it's really the hop. You can just keep tasting that earthy hop. It's probably been, now pushing 15, 20 seconds since I had my last sip. I can still taste that beautiful earthy hop presence, and it's quite pronounced. It's not just like a subtle hint. It's a quite pronounced hop presence that just sticks with you. This is a lovely beer. I'm going to take my time and come up with my scores, and then we will move on to our second beer of the day, the Barrier Brew Company's collaboration that they did with the band Dream Theater. This is a Pilsner. Barstool Warrior is the name, and it's 5%. They are out of Oceanside, New York. All right, so jumping straight into beer number 2. This is the Barrier Brewing Company's Barstool Warrior. This is one of the 2 Pilsners today, 5% ABV on this one. They are out of Oceanside, New York, and this was indeed brewed in collaboration with the band Dream Theater. I imagine this will be a rockin' good Pilsner. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. Nonetheless, let's look at the kind of neat looking art on the label. That was a proper dad joke, and I'm not a dad. All right, yeah, really neat artwork. Kind of a cyborg holding a skull in its hand. Interesting, looks neat. Nonetheless, nice tall can here. Let's get this cracked. And to be fair, this is actually just a little bit cooler than British cellar temperature. I am having to work today, so I'm having to squeeze in the rest of this review when I can. So let's go ahead and get this poured right in the glass. Oh, that is a really light colored Pilsner. That's quite light. Pilsner, not a deeply colored style of beer on average, using Pils malts, but these are some very light Pils malts. That looks a lot more akin to a Goza or a Saison. It's a super light. I mean, that's lighter than even a German Helles lager by a substantial margin. I don't know if the camera's picking this up or not, but it is very, very effervescent. Classic Pilsner. Formed a nice, beautiful, creamy Pilsner head on top. It looks the part, no question, albeit a little lighter shade than I am akin to seeing in a Pilsner. Let's give it a sniff. Okay, not a ridiculously pronounced aroma. You got to really get down in there and breathe deeply, but when you do, you're rewarded with a classic Pilsner aroma. It's got the classic Pilsner malt backbone and some nice classically well-chosen Pilsner hops that are appropriate for the style. It smells very good. This smells very much akin to any German or Czech or any other classic Pilsner brewer that I've ever smelled. Looks great, smells great, head formed beautifully, still holding some nice cling. Let's jump right in, give it a sip. Okay, yeah. That's a tasty Pilsner. That's a very, very tasty Pilsner. I would say on the front, it's on the sweeter side of the Pilsner spectrum. Some are sweeter than others. If you caught, oh gosh, it's been several episodes back now, but I did do multiple reviews of German brewers. In there, I did some Pilsner comparisons. Bitburger Premium Pils, I know for a fact I did, because that's still to this day my favorite Pilsner of them all. And there was another pretty similar. This one's more akin to the other, where it's got a sweeter side, but this has an even more pronounced sweetness. It's almost honey-like, like a mead. The way that the sweetness comes on, very, very forward. It does finish with a classic hoppiness to the Pils. It's not overtly hoppy, and it's certainly not as hoppy as most German and Czech Pilsners, but overall, it's a good rendition of the style, and it's got a very clean finish as you expect from a Pils. body is probably medium in the realm of Pilsners. It's a medium body. The mouthfeel is super, super light, super non-viscous at all. Very light, very effervescent. It feels just like a Pilsner should in your mouth. A finish is still going. It's the way that it produces the finish, it's really a nice even 50-50 balance of hop and malt. And the nice thing about the finish on this is heavily kind of honey sweet it is on the front. And for the first several seconds that you're getting the taste in your mouth, it finishes with a nice classic, more earthy hop-centric profile like the Germans and Czechs would brew a Pilsner. And it's got a little dryness on the back, not overtly dry. It's mostly wet, but there's a little hint of dryness on the back, which you often get with Pilsners as well. Overall, I would say this is a really, really nicely done American example of a Pilsner. This is a very good beer indeed. This is very refreshing and it's very well done. It's a little sweeter than I would go for personally, but it's not uncommon and it's certainly not inappropriate for this style. You're welcome to have a little sweetness in the malt and still have it present as a proper well-brewed Pilsner. And this is very well balanced. There's a beautiful balance between the malt and the hops. And it's not pungent hops, and it's not as hop forward and hop centric as a lot of the European Pilsners, but it's still very nice. You can very much tell that this was brewed as a Pilsner even before that first sip. Just smelling it and then that first sip confirms it. This is a really lovely example of a Pils. I'm not disappointed in this beer at all. Oh, that's so good. It's so refreshing. Pilsners, for my money, are one of the quintessential hot day, summertime, thirst-quenching beers. There's just something about the flavors and aromas of a Pilsner that just reminds you of finally relaxing and quenching the thirst after cutting the grass. I don't know what it is about them, but they are my proto, de facto, just go straight to it on a hot summer day. I love a good Pilsner, and this is a great one. I really enjoy this. I'm going to take my time sipping this. I'm going to finish topping this off as well and work up my scores. And when we come back, we will jump to our third and final beer of today's review, the Aslan Brewing Company's Washington Gold. Also a Pilsner, 4.8% ABV on this one out of Bellingham, Washington. And this is the one that was the official beer of Seattle Beer Week this year. So looking forward to it. And I'll come with my scores and we'll be right back. All right, jumping into our third and final beer of today's lighter beer review, we move on to our second Pilsner. This is the Aslan Brewing Company's Washington Gold Pils, the official beer of Seattle Beer Week 2019. 4.8% ABV out of Bellingham, Washington. Can, pretty simple. Got a lion on it, Washington Gold, a little kind of textured background there. Looks subdued, but let's get this cracked and see if the can is hiding a pleasant little surprise here, albeit a plain looking can. All right, pouring this beer into the glass, I would say this appearance wise looks, I mean, nearly identical to the Barrier Brewing Company's Barstool Warrior in terms of color, in terms of effervescence, and indeed visually how the head formed. Yeah, that's a very, very effervescent beer, classic Pils. It's a little lighter than your average German or Czech Pils, but it looks great. Head formed, again, beautifully. Really nice, creamy, foamy head. It's got some nice medium and larger bubbles. It's going to break it down pretty quickly here. Let's give it a sniff. Okay, it smells nice. Overall, the aroma, you really got to breathe in deeply. It's not quite as pungent of an aroma as the Barstool Warrior Pilsner was, but it smells essentially identical. It's the classic Pilsner aroma. You get that nice Pilsner malt backbone with some nice earthier kind of Pilsner appropriate hops. I mean, for all intents and purposes, these look the same, they smell the same. More or less. Yeah, the aroma's opened up a little bit as the head is starting to collapse and the bubbles are bursting and letting some of that aroma creep out of the glass here. It smells nice, not an overpowering aroma. I would say it's on the lower end of average in terms of strength of the aroma, but it smells very nice. Looks great. Head settled down a bit already, so let's jump right in, see how this compares. Ooh. Now, aroma and visually may more or less be identical, but these flavor profiles could not be more different if they tried. Whereas the Barstool Warrior had this honey-like sweetness to it, there's no hint of sweetness in this at all. This is very, very much more in alignment with the classic German or Czech Pilsner. In fact, I think this is such a well-done Pilsner in the classic German and Czech style that if you put this in a lineup and, you know, didn't show me who it was from whom, I would not guess that this was brewed by an American craft brewer. This is a really, really nice Pilsner. This is very, very hop forward. It's got a much more bitter edge and a much more in-your-face hop presence than the Barstool Warrior as a comparison. Body and mouthfeel wise, the body on this one feels maybe a little lighter, which is 0.2% ABV lower than the Barstool Warrior. Now, it's not that big of a difference, but the body definitely feels a little lighter on this. And the mouthfeel, while it is effervescent, it's actually a lot creamier. It's actually not that far off from a cream ale. It's got this very creamy, really silky-like quality to it that's very nice, in my opinion. What's really sticking with me here, and I do mean sticking with me, is while the mouthfeel isn't viscous, it's creamy, and the flavors are really sticking all over my palate, and I can just taste these hops. They are delicious, classic Pilsner hop profile. It's earthy bitters. It's not pungent bitters, but they're there, and they're enough that, yeah, that's got a nice bitter edge to it. This is, for my money, a quintessential Pilsner. This is what a Pilsner is and really should be. They run the gamut. I like a little more bitter forward, a little hop intensive Pilsner compared to some of the others. And sweetness is certainly in the range of Pilsners. I just prefer this. This is a great Pilsner for my money. This really could stand aside with any of the top Czech or German Pilsners I've ever had. This is a fantastic beer. Just like the Barstool, it's got that inherent Pilsner quality that just, if you were on a really hot summer day, just finished cutting the grass, you would just grab one of these and absolutely be in heaven. Finish-wise, it's hop dominant. You do still get the classic Pilsner malt bill on the back, but the hop is very much the star of this Pilsner, which I really appreciate. I really, really do. It's very nice. They're not all like this. In fact, I would say that fewer are that hop dominant than you know, compared to the rest of the other Pilsner offerings. But these to me are just a little more special. They're a little bit different. Just like you could make an argument that the Barstool Warrior, it's not often you get a Pilsner that has that much of a honey sweet presence. They're both polar opposites on the same spectrum of the same beer style, and they're both appropriate for the style. These are both excellent Pilsners. I happen to personally enjoy this one better because I'm a hophead and I like the more bitter edge to a beer. And this has got a really nice bitter edge to it. The finish is quite long. I can still taste the hops in there, and I'll tell you at the very end, the more the finish keeps going, the grain bill starts to come in a little greater, and it starts to kind of pair together, and it has this beautiful grain and hop finish to it. This is a really nice beer. I'm really enjoying this one. I'm going to take my time, finish enjoying this while I come up with my scores, and then we'll come back and get all three ranked top to bottom. All right, now that we have gotten to enjoy all three of these beers, we're going to go through and get our rankings from top to bottom, left to right. Starting with the Bale Breaker Brewing Company's Field 41, this was the single pale ale in this bunch. 5.2% ABV out of Moxie, Washington, deep in the heart of the Yakima Valley, Pacific Northwestern hop belt. It just is. It's the #1 hop region in the country, just growing in abundance. And Bale Breaker grows their own, so they have them as fresh as can be to use in their beer. All right, starting out with the aroma. The aroma on this was nice for a pale ale. It was certainly above average, but it wasn't as pungent, really as many of the top tier for aroma. I don't mean beer, I just mean in terms of aroma. It was present, but it wasn't ridiculously pronounced. Again, above average, I gave it a 7. For the taste, this was a really good beer. In terms of a pale ale, I thought it tasted ridiculously fresh, and the hops came through very freshly, but I didn't think it had quite enough of a hop bite for me to push it to top tier status for the taste rating, but nonetheless well above average. I did give it an 8. The body on this was actually just okay in terms of a pale ale. 5.2% ABV. I did expect that it would be a little more present for a pale ale. It's right in the average range ABV wise, but you know, maybe just not enough malt backbone to let it really produce a little bit bigger, thicker body. It was in the average range, you know, working its way up, but it was still average. I gave it a 6. The mouthfeel on this. This was a really nice mouthfeel. Very good example of a pale ale mouthfeel, but again, it wasn't quite top tier, but I did still give it an 8 out of 10. The finish on this one. The finish was very long. It was a very classic pale ale finish where you could get a nice balance of the malt back and the hop forward nature of a pale ale. It's not to the same level as an India pale ale because there's far fewer hops in it, but it does still have a classic bitter hop profile to it. And this had a very nice balance of the flavors that lasted a really long time, like a really long time for a pale ale. I give it a perfect 10 out of 10 for the finish. The head and retention on this one, this formed a really nice head. It bloomed up nicely. It just, the bubbles were a little too large, so it collapsed much quicker than you'd expect in a pale ale, but still well above average. I gave it an 8 out of 10. For the appearance, this was textbook classic pale ale. I give it a perfect 10 out of 10. The balance on here. The balance affected several categories, but it wasn't off by much. I really appreciated how I could get the malt bill in the back and also the hop characteristics. I would have liked just a little more hop presence for a pale ale. It should be just a bit more bitter than that on average. So I only docked at 1 point though. I gave it a 9 for the balance. Feeling an intangible, I really enjoyed this. I drink a good bit of pale ales. Some are far superior to others, but I did really enjoy this one, and this was ridiculously fresh tasting. The hops just jumped out at you. It was really just a volume thing that affected other categories, but my subjective, I loved it. I give it a perfect 10. Finally, as an example of the style, pale ales, you know, despite their relative simplicity, it's a tricky style of beer to brew. You got to get and strike the exact right balance of malt and hop, and you have the hop too present, it can really start getting into, you know, an IPA flavor profile with that hop intensity. And if you get too many malts, it can start tasting like, you know, a double IPA might and drown out the hop. This was very well balanced overall. Just a couple little nitpicks, really. As an example of the style, I thought it was excellent. I give it a 9 out of 10. That brings the Bale Breaker's Field 41 Pale Ale to a total score of 85 out of 100. A very good score indeed, well above average for a pale ale. Moving on to beer number 2. This is Barrier Breaking Company's Barstool Warrior. This is one of the 2 Pilsners. 5% ABV on this one out of Oceanside, New York. This was brewed in collaboration with the band Dream Theater. The aroma on this. The aroma on this one, it was nice, but it wasn't particularly pronounced. You really had to get deep down into the glass to kind of pick up anything. When you did, you smelled a traditional Pilsner aroma. It just wasn't very pronounced. It wasn't weak, it wasn't strong, it was just in the middle, so I gave it a 5. Taste, I really enjoyed this one. It was a good example of a Pilsner by an American brewer. In my opinion, it was pretty closely aligned to a classic German and Czech style. It just wasn't quite as bolder in your face, which a lot of people may like that, but I like the bigger, bolder European Pilsners personally, and they're kind of my benchmark. They invented this style. I think they ought to know how the beer is produced. Nonetheless, this was a very, very good example. I gave it an 8. For the body on this was perfect Pilsner. I gave it a 10 out of 10. The mouthfeel was perfect Pilsner. I gave it a 10 out of 10. The finish on this. The finish was nice. It was certainly a longer finish than your average Pilsner, but it wasn't as long as a lot of the other American craft and European Pilsner offerings, but still, I gave it a 7. The head and retention on this was a textbook Pilsner head and textbook Pilsner retention. I give it a perfect 10. Appearance-wise, this was a nice looking beer. It was a nice looking Pilsner. It was just the roasted nature of the malts were a little lighter than your average Pilsner. It was kind of Gose Saison colored, very, very light yellow, kind of straw hay color. Typically, there's a little bit more of an amber hue to brighten up the intensity and the depth of the yellow, but it still was a nice looking Pilsner and within range. I gave it above average. I gave it an 8 out of 10. The balance on this. This was a well-balanced beer. The malt bill really came through nicely, and the hops did as well, though, again, for a Pilsner, I do like a little extra hop presence, and it's really because I'm judging Pilsners based on the European benchmark who invented this style. This was close. I only docked 1 point. I gave it a 9. Feeling an intangible, I really enjoyed it. Pilsners are one of my absolute favorite styles in the world. They're quite varied. They can run the gamut from sweeter honey to more bitter intensity and everything in between. And I'll stand by this. It's a tough style to brew. It seems like it would be a simple one, but it's really not. It's just like pale ales. It requires a very delicate balance of the malt and the hops and exactly what type and in what quantities you use and balancing out that ABV. It's not easy. This was a good one. I enjoyed it. I give it an 8. Finally, as an example of the style, I also gave it an 8. And really, I only docked points taking into consideration malt and hop balance and kind of other facets within the style. If the finish had been a little longer, if it had just a little bit more depth of color and a little more hop presence, I probably would have ticked it up. But as it were, an 8 is still a great score. That brings the total score on Barrier Brewing Company's Barstool Warrior to an 83 out of 100. So again, another fantastic score, only 2 points lower than the Bale Breaker Pale Ale. That brings us on to our third and final beer, the second Pilsner of today's review. This is the Aslan Brewing Company's Washington Gold Pilsner, 4.8% ABV on this one out of Bellingham, Washington. And again, if you didn't recall, this was the official beer of Seattle Beer Week this year. I think they chose wisely. This was a really nice beer. Starting with the aroma. This was the one category that I was a little surprised. It was the lower end of average. You really had to get in there and really, really sniff. When you did, it smelled like a classic German or Czech Pilsner. So I had a suspicion it would be a little more hop forward, brewed in the traditional European style, but gave it a 4 for the aroma. Taste-wise, I was not disappointed at all. This tasted exactly as I anticipated from the aroma when I finally could get the details from it. It was a classic European style Pilsner. This was a perfect 10 out of 10. The body on this. This was another category. It just absolutely nailed it. This was textbook Pilsner body. Perfect 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel on this one was nice. It was a little bit silkier than I expect from a Pilsner. It's not a bad aspect. Certainly they can be a bit creamier, but for me, it was just shy. So I did give it a 9. Moving on to the finish. The finish on this was everything really that I hoped it would be. It just didn't last and stick with me as long as I would have liked. It was gone a little too soon, but everything about it and the balance of the flavors and how they developed across the finish was wonderful. I did give it a 9. Head and retention, This was another one that absolutely nailed it. That was textbook Pilsner head and textbook Pilsner head retention, 10 out of 10. The appearance on this. This I rated the exact same as the Barstool Warrior, and for the same reason. They looked nearly identical. It was just a shade or two off of the standard average Pilsner for a European style by which I judge Pilsners. I did give it an 8, but still well above average. The balance on this beer was fantastic. Really, the only thing I could say was just a little bit more hop presence and a little bit more forward nature on the hops, maybe some with a little more acid to let it stick around the mouth a bit more and develop a slightly richer mouthfeel to let it stick to extend the finish, and it probably would have been balanced perfectly for my liking, but as it were, a 9, another very, very high score. Feeling any intangible? I absolutely loved it. Anytime I get an American craft brewer that brews in the European style of brewing a Pilsner, I am always pleased. And this was a really, really fine example. I give it a perfect 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, I only knocked the 1 point, and it's from all the, it's really nitpicking, but I have to be completely honest and rank objectively, other than my feeling and intangible category, but still, I loved it. Wonderful example, 9 out of 10. That brings the total score on the Aslan Brewing Company's Washington Gold to an 88 out of 100. So all total, only a 5-point spread between all three beers, 2 Pilsners, 1 Pale Ale. All of these were excellent. If you're a fan of Pale Ales or Pilsners, I would highly recommend all three of these. Hands down, they're worth trying. They're all a little bit different. Bring something completely different to the table. So, you know, it just depends on what you like. Certainly take my feedback on what I experienced, you know, and hopefully that can point you in the right direction for something you might enjoy. Nonetheless, that's today's review. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, I really do thank you, and we appreciate your support. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing. It'll get our videos in your feed, and it certainly will help others find us. If you enjoyed the content, I would also encourage you to like. That also helps as well. And please do consider leaving comments. Thus far, it's as quiet as a church. You could hear a pin drop. I would love to interact with you. Let me know your thoughts, what you enjoyed, if you have a difference of opinion, if there's something you think I ought to try, if there's something you'd like to see. We are actively seeking your feedback, and we'll take it to heart. If you would like to stay in the loop when our videos go live on YouTube, you can click the notification bell and it will let you know as soon as they go live. We will be adding a 3rd video per week in the coming 3 to 5 weeks, most likely. Another new, this is not beer reviews. This is something totally separate I'm really excited about, and I hope you'll subscribe and follow and keep watching so you can catch what this new exciting series is coming up. Honestly, I can't wait. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm hoping I get a lot of engagement because that's going to make it even more fun for me. But ladies and gentlemen, that's our review for today. I do again appreciate it. Thank you very much. We'll see you on the next one. Keep it beer, keep it craft. Cheers.